From the outside, my family seemed like the perfect portrait of success. My father, Thomas Wellington, was a celebrated corporate magnate known for his ruthless business acumen and sharp mind. My mother, Evelyn, was his graceful counterpart, hosting charity galas and maintaining an impeccable image of sophistication. Together, they built a legacy that demanded nothing less than perfection, not just for themselves, but for me, their only daughter. Growing up in the grandeur of our sprawling estate, with its crystal chandeliers and manicured gardens, I was constantly reminded of my family's expectations. It wasn't enough to excel academically or charm people with good manners. I had to embody the Wellington legacy. My future, as meticulously planned by my parents, included an Ivy League education, a career in law or business, and most importantly, a marriage to someone worthy of our name. Love, in their world, wasn't about connection or happiness. It was a strategic alliance, a merger of social standing and wealth. To my parents, marriage was a transaction, not a partnership. Any deviation from their vision wasn't just frowned upon, it was a betrayal of everything they stood for. And so, I grew up knowing that my greatest duty was to make them proud, no matter what it cost me. Little did they know, everything was about to change. I met Adam on a rainy afternoon that felt like it was ripped from the pages of a novel. The city streets were slick with water, and I ducked into a small, cozy cafe to escape the downpour. That's when I saw him, a man sitting at a corner table, sketching something in a worn notebook. His appearance was rugged but clean, his hands rough but purposeful as they moved the pencil across the page. At first glance, Adam was nothing like the men I'd grown up around. His clothes were simple, a faded plaid shirt and jeans, but his presence was magnetic. His deep, thoughtful eyes carried a weight, a story untold, and yet they exuded a warmth that made it impossible to look away. As fate would have it, we struck up a conversation. It wasn't long before I learned about his past, a past my parents would have deemed unforgivable. Adam had spent years in prison for a mistake he made as a reckless teenager, caught in the wrong crowd. But his time behind bars hadn't broken him. Instead, it had forged him into someone remarkable, a man of integrity, resilience, and an unyielding desire to build a better life. The more I listened, the more I saw the man beyond the label. Adam wasn't defined by his past, but by how he had chosen to rise above it. Despite the warnings ringing in my head about what my family would think, I knew one thing for certain: I had to see him again. The evening I told my parents about Adam was one I would never forget. We were sitting in the opulent dining room, surrounded by polished silverware and flickering candlelight. My mother had just finished discussing an upcoming gala when I decided to drop the bombshell. "I've met someone," I began, my voice trembling slightly but resolute. "His name is Adam. I love him, and we're going to get married." The silence that followed was deafening. My father, who had been reaching for his glass of wine, froze mid-motion. My mother blinked rapidly as if she hadn't heard me correctly. Then came the explosion. "Adam who?" my father barked, his tone sharp and cutting. "What does he do? Who are his parents?" "He's a carpenter," I replied, my voice steady despite the lump forming in my throat. "And he's a good man." "A carpenter?" My father's voice rose, incredulous. "Are you out of your mind, Samantha? Do you realize what this will do to our reputation? To you?" "Your father's right," my mother added, her voice softer but no less pointed. "We've worked so hard to give you everything, and this is how you repay us? By throwing your life away on a man with no future?" The argument escalated. They demanded to know everything about Adam, and when I revealed his past, the room descended into chaos. "A criminal?" my father shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "Have you lost all sense of reason? He'll drag you down with him. You'll ruin everything we've built for you." Their words stung, but I stood my ground. Adam is not his past. He's kind, hardworking, and he makes me happy, happier than I've ever been in this house. My father's face darkened, his tone cold and final. "Then you have a choice to make, Samantha. Either leave him or leave this family. But know this, if you walk out that door, you don't come back." Tears filled my eyes, but my resolve was unshaken. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "but I choose him." And with that, I walked out, leaving behind the only life I had ever known for the love that made me feel alive. The first night in our new home was nothing like the life I had left behind. Gone were the towering chandeliers, the marble floors, and the silent, well-dressed staff tending to every need. Instead, Adam and I sat on the floor of our tiny one-bedroom apartment, eating takeout from a cheap plastic container. The dim light flickered overhead and the walls were bare, yet for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never known before. Freedom. But freedom came at a cost. With my family's financial support gone, Adam and I had to figure out everything on our own. I had savings, enough to last a few months, but after that, we were on our own. Adam, ever the optimist, believed finding work would be easy. He was skilled with his hands, a hard worker, and more determined than anyone I knew. But the world wasn't as forgiving. His criminal record followed him like a shadow, and job after job turned him away. We appreciate your application, but we've decided to move forward with another candidate. We don't hire people with past convictions. It's company policy. The rejections came in every form, but the meaning was always the same. He wasn't good enough in their eyes. I watched his shoulders grow heavier with each denial, but he never complained, never let his frustration show. So I took charge. I found a job at a local diner, waiting tables for long hours. It wasn't glamorous and the customers could be cruel, but it paid the rent. At night, I took on a second job at a small bookstore, stocking shelves and running the register until closing. Exhaustion became my new normal, but every time I came home to Adam, to the man who loved me unconditionally, I knew we had made the right choice. We had nothing, but we had each other. And for now, that was enough. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of work, exhaustion, and rejection. Every morning, Adam would wake up early, determined to find a job, and every evening he would return with the same defeated look in his eyes. No one wanted to hire an ex-convict. His past clung to him like a stain that refused to wash away. I watched as the weight of our struggles began to take its toll on him. His shoulders sagged, his jaw clenched more often, and the spark in his eyes dimmed little by little. He never complained, never voiced his frustration, but I could see it in the way he stared out of our small apartment window at night, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. One evening, as I came home from my second shift, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, his hands gripping a rejection letter so tightly that the paper had wrinkled beneath his fingers. "I'm useless, Sam," he muttered, his voice low, defeated. "I can't provide for us. I can't even get a damn job. What kind of husband am I?" I knelt beside him, taking his hands in mine. Those hands had built furniture, sketched beautiful drawings, and held me in my darkest moments. They were hands of a man who had suffered, but who had never given up. "You're not useless," I said, my voice firm. "You're the strongest person I know, and you don't have to do this alone. We're a team." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with emotions too heavy to name. "You deserve better than this life, Sam. You could have had everything." I smiled through my exhaustion, pressing my forehead against his. "I already have everything I need." Life didn't get easier after that night. The bills piled up, the stress mounted, and our future remained uncertain. There were days when I came home so exhausted that I could barely stand, and nights when Adam sat in silence, lost in his thoughts. But through it all, we held on to each other. We had chosen this life, and despite the hardships, despite the pain, we had no regrets. The breaking point came on a cold morning when Adam sat at the kitchen table, staring at yet another rejection letter. The light in our tiny apartment felt dimmer than usual, the walls closing in like a suffocating cage. I had never seen him this drained, this defeated. That evening, as we sat together, wrapped in silence, Adam suddenly spoke. "I can't keep doing this," he murmured, "chasing jobs that will never come. Maybe I need to focus on what I actually can do." I turned to him, curiosity flickering in my tired eyes. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "When I was in prison, I met men who never got a second chance. The system wasn't built to help them rebuild their lives. I want to change that. I want to help guys like me find a way out." It was the first time in weeks that I something returned to his expression. Purpose. The next day, Adam walked into a small community center that ran programs for ex-convicts looking to reintegrate into society. He volunteered his time, offering advice, sharing his story, and helping others navigate the challenges of post-prison life. For the first time, his past wasn't a burden. It was a tool to help others. Word spread quickly. A few months later, a nonprofit organization specializing in rehabilitation for former inmates reached out to Adam, impressed by his dedication. They offered him a paid position as a program coordinator. It wasn't a high-paying job. It wasn't glamorous. But when he told me the news, I saw something in his eyes that no amount of money could buy: hope. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. Adam threw himself into his work with an energy I hadn't seen in him before. It was as if he had finally found his purpose, and nothing could stop him. Every day, he spent hours at the nonprofit organization, meeting with former inmates, guiding them through job applications, and helping them rebuild their confidence. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was making a difference. At first, the change was subtle. A man would come in, shoulders slumped, defeated by rejection after rejection, much like Adam had once been. But after a few meetings with him, something would shift. They would leave standing a little taller, hope flickering back into their eyes. Adam became a mentor to hundreds of men who had once believed their lives were over. He taught them how to find work, how to speak about their past with honesty, but without shame, how to hold their heads high. His story became an inspiration, proof that a second chance was possible. But helping others wasn't enough. He wanted to do more. One evening, as we sat together in our apartment, Adam turned to me with that familiar fire in his eyes. "We need funding," he said. "There are too many guys out there who don't even know help exists. If we had more resources, we could reach more people." I knew what he was asking before he even said the words. I still had connections to my old life, to wealthy donors, to people who could help. I reached for his hand. "Let's do it." We spent weeks organizing a fundraising event, a small gathering, nothing too extravagant, but enough to bring attention to the cause. I pulled every string I could, called in every favor, and soon our event was packed with potential donors, journalists, and city officials. That night, Adam stood before the crowd and told his story, not as a criminal, but as a man who had fought his way back. His voice was steady, his conviction undeniable, and as I watched the audience listen, I knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger than either of us had ever imagined. Not all wounds from the past heal easily. Some remain lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Adam had spent years running from his past, but fate had a way of bringing things full circle. It happened on an ordinary afternoon at the nonprofit center. Adam was speaking to a group of newly released inmates when a voice, cold, mocking, cut through the room. Well, if it isn't Adam Carter, didn't think I'd see you playing the saint." Adam stiffened. I recognized that look, the tension in his jaw, the slight clench of his fists. He turned, and there he was. Derek Malone, the man who had set him up all those years ago. Derek had been part of the same crowd that had dragged Adam into trouble in the first place. But unlike Adam, he had never taken responsibility for his actions. He had walked free while Adam had paid the price. Derek smirked, stepping closer. "I read about you. Some sob story, huh? Ex-con turned good guy? You really think people are buying this act?" His eyes glinted with amusement. "Come on, Adam. Guys like us don't change. We just get better at lying." The room fell silent. This was a test. I could see the old instincts warring within Adam. The years of anger, the betrayal, the bitterness. It was all there, simmering beneath the surface. A younger version of him might have snapped, might have thrown a punch and proven Derek right, but the man standing before me was not that same person. Adam exhaled slowly, his fists loosening at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady. "I'm not like you, Derek," he said. "Not anymore." Derek scoffed. "Come on, man. You think these people see you as anything other than a criminal trying to clean up his image? You'll always be one of us." Adam's eyes never wavered. I used to believe that. I used to think my past defined me. But it doesn't. I made mistakes, I paid for them, and now I choose to be better. That's the difference between us. Derek's smirk faltered just for a second. He had expected the old Adam, the one who would lash out, who would let his emotions get the best of him, but that man was gone. Adam took a step forward, lowering his voice so only Derek could hear. If you ever decide you want to stop running from yourself, you know where to find me. But if all you came here for is to drag me back into the mud, you can leave. For a long moment, Derek said nothing. Then, with a chuckle and a shake of his head, he turned and walked away. The tension in the room eased, but Adam remained still, his shoulders squared, his hands steady. He had faced his past, and this time, he had won. A week after the encounter with Derek, Adam received an email that would change everything. It came from the National Alliance for Rehabilitation and Reintegration, one of the biggest organizations dedicated to helping former inmates rebuild their lives. The subject line read, "Keynote Speaker Invitation, Annual Conference on Second Chances." Adam read it twice, then a third time, as if his brain refused to process the words. They wanted him to speak. Not just attend the event, but stand on stage in front of thousands of people, sharing his story with policymakers, nonprofit leaders, and ex-convicts fighting for a new beginning. When he finally looked at me, I saw something rare in his eyes. Disbelief. They want me to speak?" he murmured, almost to himself. "There are real experts in this field, people with degrees, experience." I reached out, gripping his hand, "And none of them have lived what you have. None of them understand like you do." His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, scanning the email again. "I never thought anyone would care about my story," he admitted, "that someone would actually want to hear it." I smiled. "Adam, your story is the reason men like you still have hope. This is your chance to show the world what second chances really mean." After a long silence, he nodded, his fingers tightening around mine. He was ready. The day of the conference, Adam stood on stage, gripping the edges of the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd of hundreds of people in the audience, with thousands more watching online. City officials, social workers, former inmates, and families desperate for hope all sat in quiet anticipation. I sat in the front row, my hands clenched together, heart pounding with pride and nerves, as Adam took a deep breath and began speaking. "I was 19 years old when I was first told I'd never be anything but a criminal." The room stilled. The weight of his words settled over the audience like a heavy fog. Then he told them everything. The mistakes, the prison sentence, the rejection, the hopelessness. I spent years believing that my past defined me, that no one would ever give me a second chance, until one person did. His eyes met mine, and I felt tears sting my eyes. Samantha saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. She reminded me that I could choose to be more than my worst mistake. By the time he finished, the room erupted in applause. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. But it wasn't just the people in that room who heard his words. It was the world. The video of Adam's speech spread like wildfire. Within days, it was everywhere. Social media blew up with shares, news outlets covered his story, and people from all walks of life reached out, thanking him for his honesty. Then the emails started coming. Organizations, big ones, wanted to work with Adam. Tech companies, educational programs, even the state government reached out with offers to collaborate on initiatives for inmate rehabilitation. Adam had spent years knocking on doors, begging for an opportunity. Now, the doors were opening on their own. One night, as he scrolled through yet another partnership offer, I leaned over his shoulder and whispered, "Do you believe it now?" He turned to me, smiling, the same boyish, hopeful grin I had fallen in love with. "Yeah, I think I do." Adam's life had transformed in ways neither of us had ever imagined. Just a year ago, he was knocking on doors, begging for a job. Now, he was being invited onto national television to talk about his work. One morning, an email arrived that left us both speechless. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You have been selected to receive the National Humanitarian Award for your work in criminal rehabilitation." I read it twice, then looked up at Adam, who sat frozen, the email still glowing on his phone screen. He swallowed. They're giving me an award? I laughed, tears already forming. You deserve this, Adam. The National Humanitarian Award was no small thing. It was given to people who had made a tangible impact on society, people who had changed lives. And now Adam was one of them. The award ceremony was televised nationwide. When Adam stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. As he stood before the crowd, composed of politicians, CEOs, social leaders, he no longer looked like the man who once doubted himself. He looked like someone who had found his purpose. A few years ago, I sat in a prison cell believing my life was over, that no one would ever see me as anything more than my mistakes. But here's what I learned. Redemption isn't given, it's earned. And it starts when someone believes in you. His voice was steady, but his hands gripped the podium as if the weight of the moment was just beginning to sink in. I was lucky enough to find someone who believed in me, and now I want to be that person for others. The standing ovation lasted for minutes. Some people wiped their eyes, others simply watched in admiration. By the time Adam left the stage, his name was already trending online. Articles were published calling him the man who defied his past. That night, when we returned home, Adam sat on the couch, staring at the golden award in his hands. I never thought this would be my life, he murmured. I curled up beside him, resting my head on his shoulder. It was always meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, Adam believed it too. Somewhere across the city, in a house filled with wealth but void of warmth, Thomas and Evelyn Wellington sat in stunned silence. The television screen in their grand living room flickered, displaying Adam's face as he stood before a standing ovation of the nation's most powerful figures. His words, once dismissed as meaningless by them, now echoed across the country. I was lucky enough to find someone who believed in me, and now I want to be that person for others. Evelyn's manicured hand trembled as she reached for the remote, turning up the volume. She barely noticed her husband's stiff posture beside her, his expression unreadable. This can't be real, Thomas finally muttered, his voice hoarse. But it was. The man they had once called a failure, a disgrace, the man they had thrown their daughter away for, was now a national symbol of redemption and hope. Evelyn exhaled shakily. We were wrong. Thomas said nothing. He just stared at the screen, watching Adam shake hands with government officials, his name now synonymous with success, not scandal. For the first time in years, they felt something foreign creeping into their chests. Regret. The phone rang late at night, cutting through the quiet hum of our small apartment. I glanced at Adam, who was reading on the couch, then reached for my phone. An unfamiliar number. Hellos. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Samantha. I froze. My grip on the phone tightened. My mother. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the night I walked out of their house. Not a call, not a letter, not a single attempt from either side to mend what was broken. But now, after all this time, here she was. Samantha, she repeated, softer now. I saw Adam's speech. I swallowed. My heart pounded in my chest. We both did, she continued, your father and I. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to ignore the people who had abandoned me when I needed them most. But another part, the part that had once been a daughter who longed for their approval, couldn't. We were wrong, my mother admitted. About him, about everything. I felt Adam's eyes on me from across the room. He sat up, setting his book down, sensing the shift in my body language. We want to see you, she continued. Both of you. Silence stretched between us. I felt the weight of those words pressing down on me. I don't know if I can do that, I whispered. My mother's voice broke. Please, Samantha, let us talk. Let us try to make this right. For years, I had imagined this moment, wondered if they would ever regret their decision. And now that they finally had, I didn't know what to do. I looked at Adam, searching for an answer in his steady gaze. Say yes, he said softly. Not for them, for you. I hesitated, then exhaled. Fine, I said into the phone. One conversation, that's all. My mother's relieved breath echoed through the line. And just like that, the past was knocking at my door once again. The cafe was quiet, tucked away in a part of the city that felt miles away from the grand estate where I had grown up. Adam and I sat at a corner table, waiting. My hands were wrapped around a cup of tea, though I hadn't taken a sip. Then the door opened. My parents walked in. They looked the same, and yet not. My father's posture wasn't as rigid as I remembered, and my mother's eyes, once always cold and calculated, now carried something unfamiliar: hesitation. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then my mother broke the silence. "Samantha," her voice wavered. "You look well." I nodded stiffly. "So do you." My father cleared his throat. We saw Adam's speech. I knew that. That was why we were here. But hearing him say Adam's name without disdain was strange, unsettling. My mother's gaze flickered toward Adam, who sat beside me, quiet but composed. "You've done something remarkable," she said. "You've changed lives." Adam met her gaze, then my father's. "I just wanted to prove that people can be more than their worst mistakes." My father exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "We misjudged you," he admitted. "We let our pride cloud our judgment." His eyes, for the first time in my life, looked weary. "We hurt you both, and for that I'm sorry." The words landed heavily between us. My father, a man who had built his life on control and arrogance, was apologizing. I wasn't sure what to say. For so long, I had carried the pain of their rejection, convinced they would never see the truth. Now, faced with their regret, I felt unsteady. Adam, however, remained calm. He leaned forward slightly. "You don't need to apologize to me," he said. "I don't hold any anger toward you. If anything, your rejection pushed me to prove myself, to prove that I was more than my past." My mother blinked, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "You don't resent us?" Adam shook his head. "I spent too many years being angry. It doesn't help anyone." He turned to me, his voice softer. "And Samantha never stopped believing in me. That was all I needed." My mother's breath hitched. My father nodded, solemnly. For the first time in years, we weren't enemies. And though wounds like these didn't heal overnight, I knew that this was a beginning. Reconciliation didn't happen in a single conversation. Wounds like ours needed time. But something shifted that night in the cafe. A door that had been slammed shut for years finally cracked open. We didn't return to my family's world of wealth and expectations, nor did we want to. Adam and I had built something real, something that wasn't defined by status or appearances. But for the first time, we had their blessing. Months passed and life moved forward. Adam's work continued to grow, expanding into more cities, reaching more people. He was no longer just the man trying to prove himself. He was a leader, a symbol of redemption. Then, on one unforgettable night, Adam stood on stage once again, this time at a national summit on criminal justice reform. Thousands watched, both in the audience and through their screens at home. I stood backstage, watching as he spoke, his voice steady, confident. My husband, my partner, the man who had defied the odds. As the crowd erupted into applause, he turned his head slightly, his eyes searching for me. I smiled. We had chosen love. We had chosen our own path. And now the world finally saw what I had seen all along. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of loyalty, love, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Join us as we share stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment.